thought.
This outrage it's very understandable, Steve. This is a tragedy of epic proportion, and 2 shootings in 24 hours, and 3 this week, the one in California earlier this week. It's devastating. So the outrage is understandable. But what Lisa said earlier is absolutely correct, that there is no simplistic understanding of a solution to this. And I think that it's important to condemn this for what it is: domestic terrorist violence of white national motivated by white nationalism. And I do think that this is also indicative of a broader trend that we see today of the existential crisis of meaning in our country, that we see motivating the opioid crisis and the suicide epidemic and anxiety and just utter despair that Americans are suffering from. And they're finding their meaning in all of these misplaced, in radical ideology and in violence. And I think it's important to have a more comprehensive discussion about these social problems, and again, not approach it with simplistic policy.
It echoes what you were saying a little bit earlier, Lisa.
Well, and I was going to say, again, just with the complex nature of this, I mean, for instance, you look at the El Paso shooting, and as you rightfully said, it looks like it was a hate-driven and hate-motivated shooting. But I mean, you go down the line and they all don't necessarily fit that box in the sense that it came from, this white supremacist viewpoint necessarily. And even the shooter, if his manifesto, which has been out there, is correct, has complex viewpoints himself. He also talked about climate change and how we need to rid the earth of less people, right? So again, to the complex nature of all this, and you go down the line, you can see even for the Dayton shooting, we don't know the motivation there yet. You can look at the Las Vegas shooting. We don't know the motivation there, but you have a white guy gunning down people at a country music concert. You go to another shooting that happened in Texas, the Dallas shooting. It was an African-American man who wanted to target white police officers. You even go to Virginia Tech. I mentioned at the top of the show was a Virginian. The Virginia Tech shooter, it was an Asian man, again carrying 2 handguns, which again gets to the bigger problem of how complex this is, because you have people saying, well, let's take away guns like the AR-15. I've never owned one. I probably will never own one in my entire life. But that being said, okay, so what happens the next time there's a Virginia Tech shooting and the person uses 2 handguns? Do we then take away handguns? So if you're a gun owner, I can completely understand the concern of the slippery slope argument.
First of all, the police, they've done an amazing job here. I mean, the police were on this, and saved hundreds of lives in both these, instances. And I get frustrated with some of my friends on the left who demagogue against the police. You've heard them, say, oh, they're throwing people in jail. It shouldn't be. And no, there's some of that. But come on, the first responders are the heroes here. Second of all, I always tell my kids, we go to the movies, they want to sit in the middle seats. So I'm like, people, given how widespread these attacks have been and these shootings, people just have to be aware. I say sit on the aisle, because you never know when this kind of thing is going to happen. Yeah. So people have to just be aware that this is a new environment we live in.
Which is a pretty grim and depressing note to end it on. But I'm afraid that we're going to have to end it there. Thank you for all those perspectives. We're going to change the topic and get back to what we had planned to talk to you about tonight. Coming up, 3 ideas that President Trump could usefully steal from the Democrats' debates last week. See you in a minute.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Aisha Hasni. Vigils are happening tonight in 2 American cities, marking a very deadly weekend for our nation. This is in Dayton, Ohio, where people are remembering the 9 people killed and the dozens injured early today by a masked gunman wearing body armor. Police tell us he was able to fire off at least 100 rounds of ammunition in 30 seconds before officers took him down. The dead include the killer's own sister, his motive unknown. The people of El Paso, Texas, also grieving following a mass shooting there yesterday that claimed the lives of 20 people and injured many more at a Walmart store. All the bodies have now been recovered. The accused killer is in custody. Investigators say that is a case of domestic terrorism, meaning the suspect could face a death penalty. I'm Aisha Hasni. Now back to the next revolution.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Now, I have had a lot of experience with election campaigns, and here's what a smart candidate does. If your opponent has good ideas, steal them and leave them with the dross. which you then attack like crazy. Now, there was certainly a ton of dross on display in the Democrats' debates last week, like decriminalizing the border, giving free health insurance to illegal immigrants, and taking health insurance away from 180 million Americans. But amongst all that loony left nonsense, there were a handful of good ideas, and President Trump should shamelessly steal them. Here's the first one.
I have a plan for a green industrial policy that takes advantage of the fact that we do what we do best, and that is innovate and create. So I've proposed putting $2 trillion in, so we do the research. We then say anyone in the world can use it so long as you build it right here in America.
So that sounds very much like what President Trump talks about in terms of, buy American, hire American. I like the sound of that.
Well, look, I'm for making things in America. We don't need the government to do it. I mean, think about what happened in energy with the fracking revolution and the shale oil and gas revolution. That was not done with any government money. It was just done by innovators. I mean, Google, Apple, Amazon, those companies that have created trillions of dollars of wealth didn't need a government agency to tell them how to do it. So I'm not too high on that idea.
And can I piggyback on that as well? Because part of what is baffling to me when Democrats want to move to something like the Green New Deal and kill off fossil fuels is part of the reason why we have reduced emissions to the degree we have is because of natural gas and innovation in the private sector. Yet they want to kill that and move to.
I guess this is substituting for the damage that, like making up for the damage.
But it's even Joe Biden also, who's apparently is supposed to be a moderate, wants to get rid of fossil fuel.
Oh, yeah, and he was very clear about that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yes, exactly. He's supposed to be the moderate.
Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and some of these states. Good luck.
Do we have any clarity about how this would differentiate from the Green New Deal? And my concern with that is it's very high-minded and I have to assume well-intentioned rhetoric, but the devil is in the details. And
the Green New Deal isn't. I wouldn't give them the credit for that. I think the Green New Deal is they admitted it. It's basically about state control of the entire economy. Anyway, let's move on. Kamala Harris on healthcare. Now, generally, her healthcare is as bad as all the others in terms of ending up with the abolition of private insurance. But there's one aspect of it, one particular element of what she's talking about that I think is worth considering.
I have met so many Americans who stick to a job that they do not like, where they are not prospering, simply because they need the health care that employer provides. It's time that we separate employers from the kind of health care people get.
Now, I think that's really interesting. Still private sector. We're not talking about Medicare for all, but the concept of separating healthcare from employers, still doing it through the private sector, so people have more labour mobility and flexibility. I think that sounds like a good idea. Look, I've run businesses here, and I was, why am I responsible for the healthcare? You know what I mean? I think that if people had their independence there, that would be better.
I agree. And if you look at the history of why our healthcare is so distorted and expensive to begin with, it really dates back to this World War II wage freeze, where employers were not allowed to increase wages. They had to compensate their employees and compete for talent in different ways. So they offered high incentives in terms of healthcare packages. And today, even today, healthcare that is employer provided is not taxable, which disproportionately does not benefit. It hurts independent contractors, the self-employed, small business owners, and it's just this carve out, this set aside that is just another government involvement in our healthcare system that has totally distorted it.
The biggest opponents of this are the unions. You know why? Because they've negotiated with these big companies these incredibly generous, health benefits. The last thing they want to do is have to get rid of those.
It seems to be there's a way of looking at the employer role in healthcare. It's a burden on business.
Oh, what was the old joke about GM? GM isn't a car company; it's a healthcare company that just happens to make cars. I mean, It is true that the incredible high costs of healthcare have really burdened American manufacturers. When you talk about ideas that Republicans should steal from the Democrats, Republicans say, look, we can cover everybody in the United States with health.
Last one.
My plan is to create a chief manufacturing officer so we could actually start making things in the United States. This person will work in the White House, report directly to me, and we're going to start making things again.
Chief manufacturing officer. I quite like the sound of that.
See, I think there are already too many people working in government. And instead of adding positions, we need to actually streamline things and get rid of people. So I think that there's way too much bureaucracy in government. As someone who worked on, Capitol Hill versus working on campaigns, you look at how much more streamlined campaigns are than Capitol Hill. I think the bureaucracy is already too big.
There's no president in modern times who's done more for manufacturing
than
the president
that's true. These basic policies have done that.
We've created over 1 million manufacturing, construction, and mining jobs in 2.5 years under Trump. the irony of this, of course, all these numbers, we should do something to help manufacturing. Wait a minute. These are the same people who want a Green New Deal that will make energy so expensive in America. We won't make anything in America if we have the Green New Deal.
I'm feeling a thumbs down for this.
Are you sure you don't want a Ministry of Love or peace or whatever?
No, that's
exactly.
I'll get to her later. Okay, let's bring. Okay, that not a great start. Let's bring in the support. This is Elizabeth Warren.